I would like to start by thanking the Denver Communists for allowing me the opportunity to present today. I would also like to note that any errors are purely my own. Um, as I was preparing for this presentation, I quickly discovered Leon Trotsky is a very divisive figure within leftist circles. I was taken aback when sneeringly called a trot by a respected comrade. In another instance, I was informed real leftists don't defend Trotsky. I didn't take the slurs to heart, and after having researched the topic for the last several weeks, I'm glad I didn't. But why is his legacy so inflammatory? What were his analyses? And crucially, do they hold any value for contemporary Marxists? The reading material this week, articles by Doug Greene and Paul Le Blanc, offer insight not only into several lasting contributions left by Comrade Trotsky, but also address ongoing conversations about the role those contributions have to play in modern revolutionary struggle. It would be difficult to find many figures as steeped in revolutionary action as Leon Trotsky. Born Lev Bronstein on November 7th, 1879, he began engaging in political activism from a young age, becoming a Narodnik. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, or revolutionary agrarian socialist populist before his 18th birthday, and shortly thereafter became a member of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. It was during his first exile from Russia that he began to understand the differences within the party and sided with the faction that called for a disciplined revolutionary party, prioritizing the overthrow of the monarchy, opposed to those members in favor of incremental improvements to worker conditions, which would theoretically lead to societal change. Trotsky would play an active role in revolutionary movements until his assassination by Stalin in 1940. Notes Greene, quote, he was the leader of the St. Petersburg Soviet of 1905, one of the main organizers of the Bolshevik insurrection of 1917, the founder of the Red Army that defended Soviet power against the counter-revolution, the chief antagonist against Stalin and the bureaucratic caste that he represented, a Cassandra-like figure on the dangers of Nazism, and the founder of the Fourth International, end quote. Leading up to 1917, Russian socialists agreed the country was primed for a revolutionary movement and acknowledged it was too industrially underdeveloped, referred to as backward, for a workers' revolution. Owing to this underdevelopment, different factions were divided on the tactic for ushering in socialism. The Mensheviks believed the bourgeoisie must spearhead the revolution, with the small working class playing a supporting role. The Bolsheviks argued the working class should lead the movement with the bourgeoisie in the supportive role due to intense skepticism of the bourgeoisie's revolutionary mettle. These standpoints were based on accepted interpretations of the theory of historical materialism. Most socialists shared the common belief that certain industrial conditions needed to exist for a successful workers' revolution, conditions which had historically been introduced through modernization ushered in by capitalism. As Le Blanc explains, quote, the growth of capitalism was facilitated by democratic revolution that swept away rule by kings and the power of landed nobles, making way for increasingly democratic republics and capitalist economies. The victory of the capitalists paves the way for the triumph of industrialization and modernization. Capitalism also creates a working class or proletarian majority that potentially has an interest in and the power required for bringing into being a socialist future, end quote. But these conflicting viewpoints on strategy presented a conundrum for both factions. Le Blanc elaborates, quote, if the working class is as essential to the democratic revolution as the Mensheviks claimed, and if their direct exploiters are the capitalists with whom they are engaged in class struggle, then how can these mortal enemies be expected to link arms as comrades in a common struggle? And if, as Lenin insisted, the workers must in fact turn their backs on the capitalists in alliance with peasantry to overthrow Tsarism, what sense would it make for them in the moment of victory to turn power over to their cowardly exploiters? End quote. Fortunately, Trotsky was of a different mind than his peers on the subject. He acknowledged the backwardness of Russia, but believed this indicated Russia's revolution would not follow the same course as revolutions in more advanced countries such as Britain. Trotsky believed Russia's small working class, united with its massive peasantry, could not only achieve a bourgeoisie revolution, but would continue the fight into a socialist one. Revolution achieved through this continuous fluidity from bourgeoisie to socialist revolution, essentially a lack of any lag between these stages, Trotsky referred to as permanent revolution. This prediction proved to be true, as the worker-led Russian Revolution was ultimately able to seize power from its ruling classes. Trotsky was also able to recognize the seriousness of the Nazi threat fomenting in Depression-era Germany. Le Blanc notes, quote, petty bourgeois and alienated working class elements flocked to a plebeian movement steeped in the ideological witch's brew of super-patriotic nationalism and racism prevalent in late 19th century and early 20th century Germany. Especially when left-wing organizations and parties prove ineffective, Trotsky argued, petty bourgeois layers will be vulnerable to fascist appeals, drawing the more conservative layers of the working class along with them, end quote. Trotsky's prescription for this problem was a united front between the huge German Communist Party, the KPD, and the even larger Social Democratic Party, the SDP, which could effectively fight off encroaching fascism, as well as work together to advance the socialist interests of both parties. As Greene notes, quote, Trotsky advocated that a united front between the two worker organizations would rely upon extra parliamentary means that would defeat the fascists. Beyond the role of defending democratic freedoms, the United Front would allow communists to expose social democratic reformism as inadequate and win those workers to revolutionary politics. The United Front would not only enable the communists to defeat fascism, but serve as a springboard for future revolutionary offensive. End quote. However, since Lenin's death and with Joseph Stalin firmly at the helm, the bureaucratic elements within the Soviet state and the Third International had continued to calcify. Adherents of Stalinism identified deviating from his prescribed doctrine as a threat to the spread of revolution elsewhere on which they were depending on to sustain their state. Stalinists viewed social democrats as a mirror movement of fascism and deemed them social fascists. The KPD, although engaged in fierce battle with the Nazis for influence over German citizenry, were aligned ideologically with Stalin's Third International and rejected Trotsky's advocacy of joining together with the SDP and chose instead to continue attacking the Social Democrats as social fascists. As anyone familiar with history knows, the Nazis ultimately triumphed in both securing political power and utterly destroying the once robust German workers' movements. The defeat of the German Revolution, whose success the Third International had blithely believed in, was devastating to the Soviet state. It was reeling from a brutal civil war and deepening economic crises. Due to these crushing circumstances, as well as the continued appointment of Stalin's supporters in positions of power, as opposed to elected positions, and despite Trotsky's acknowledgement of the Soviet Union as a worker state, he predicted the continued degeneration of genuine revolutionary ideals. Greene summarizes, quote, ultimately, Trotsky argued that the bureaucracy would dispense with the socialist facade and restore capitalism. This could be stopped only by a political revolution of the Soviet working class, which would overthrow the bureaucracy and restore Soviet democracy, end quote. No matter how hauntingly accurate Trotsky's analyses of Stalinism proved to be, or perhaps because of it, he quickly became the target of coordinated political attacks, culminating in his final expulsion from Russia and eventual assassination. The Soviet Union officially restored a system of state capitalism in the mid-1990s. As the title suggests, Paul Le Blanc's article makes the argument that the theories attributed to Trotsky are not original to the revolutionary. That is not to say Le Blanc takes this stance bitterly. Rather, his suggestion is that by furthering the analysis he did, Trotsky achieved distinction among his contemporaries in his uncompromising and creative dedication to the application of traditional Marxist theory to the conditions of Russia's material reality, and continues his serenade by stating, quote, it was Trotsky's sparkling prose that most clearly and boldly formulated the interrelated elements of permanent revolution, end quote. With regard to Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution, Le Blanc explains, quote, Trotsky himself insisted that his permanent revolution conception overlapped with perspectives of other Marxists. Far from being the unique innovation of Leon Trotsky, it is a perspective that flows naturally from the revolutionary conceptualizations inherent in the analyses and methodology of Marx himself, end quote. This point is easily illustrated through the writings of Engels, who clarified to critics and converts alike that material requirements for societal change were not limited to specific conditions. Quote, the economic situation is the basis, but the various superstructure, political forms of the class struggle and its results, to wit, constitutions established by the victorious class after a successful battle, etc., uh, jurid, jurid, juridic, I don't know how to pronounce this word, I'm sorry. Juridical, juridical forms, and even the reflexes of all these actual struggles in the brains of the participants, political, excuse me, philosophical theories, religious views, and their further development in systems of dogmas also exercise their influence upon the course of the historical struggles, and in many cases preponderate in determining their form, end quote. In Trotsky's accurate predictions of Stalinist degeneration, Le Blanc again points to Trotsky's signature of analyzing new realities with a classic theoretical lens. Quote, Trotsky sees it as related to the more general development of a bureaucratic conservative dynamic naturally deriving from historical circumstances conditioned by specific economic realities. This involves an analytical methodology quite recognizable to those familiar with the approach of Karl Marx. End quote. What does all of this, oppression, struggle, resistance, revolution, defeat, betrayal, mean for us today? Trotsky is the embodiment of realities which most Marxists are fully aware, but at times in need of reminding. He is a reminder that it is in revolutionary action, guided by revolutionary analysis, that secures the most lasting victories, not the other way around. He is a reminder that, as Le Blanc simply states, quote, it is important to listen to and learn from others, end quote. This is true of old comrades who have left us guideposts to be knowledgeable revolutionaries, but also equally applicable to sharing and spreading socialist perspectives with other people. Le Blanc recounts Trotsky advising that revolutionary activists should, quote, have in the first place a good ear and only in the second place a good tongue, end quote. He is also a reminder for revolution-minded movements to maintain their skepticism of reformists and apologists, as well as identifying and mitigating authoritarian elements within their own programs. It is my opinion, however, that the greatest lesson provided by Trotsky is the reminder that Marxist analysis is not a static endeavor. It is a living, evolving theory, its tenets capable of addressing any imaginable number of material conditions. As revolutionaries, none of us is unfamiliar with taking a hardline stance, with seeking solid intellectual and moral ground on which to stand. But Trotsky's deep understanding of theoretical principles and creative application of those principles suggest we leave space for nuance, for discovery of new applications, both in our response to current realities and when developing historic perspectives. As Greene notes about Trotsky's critique of the USSR, quote, Trotsky's perspective allows Marxists to avoid the simple binary of either condemning revolutions as dictatorial and nothing else, or uncritical adulation that leads to overlooking betrayals and problems, end quote. To be clear, this is neither a recommendation nor permission to break from classic theories of Marxism, or certainly to bend them to suit any aim, but rather a gentle suggestion if our collective exploiters benefit from controlled binary antagonisms of black and white, right and wrong, known and unknown, to become, like Trotsky, masters of new revolutionary gray areas.